When you're self-publishing, you can go completely with whatever you want to write. And there is probably a niche for everything out there if you can find the right audience, even if it's something that's really small and not popular at all and doesn't sell well. Like probably pretty much everyone can find a small audience of readers who enjoy the same thing that they write. You just got to find them, which is the biggest challenge.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edit Undo podcast. We have got a great guest for you today. For those of you who might maybe be of the pen and paper persuasion or the sort of the bookworms out there, we've got a special treat. Today we're going to be speaking with Rachel Morgan, or some of you may know her as Rochelle Morgan, which is one of her pen names. And she is the author of the Trouble series, the Ridley Kane, and I hope I don't butcher any of these names, the Ridley Kane Chronicles, the City of Wishes, the Creepy Hollow series, and the Storm Fae series. That's quite a bit, I mean, I've met
not books, series.
Yes, those are series. Those are not individual books.
Hi.
And there's a few standalones there. But before we sort of give you a chance to sort of say hi to the audience, I think this is going to be really interesting because, myself included, there are quite a number of people who have played with the idea of writing something, eventually, hopefully, maybe publishing something, and then when you really think about all the work that needs to go into that, it seems a little bit impossible. And so I'm really excited to kind of like dive into your journey and get to hear a little bit about your experiences. But before we do that, Rachel, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. You kind of started with like my least popular or least well-known series and then like moved towards the more like the Rochelle Morgan and the Trouble series. I haven't written under that name in like 5 years, maybe. Sometimes I even forget that I have those books. Yeah, so you can't, but anyway, I mean, you didn't know. But there are quite a few now.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting to you guys. Where should I begin?
Yeah, so I think where I'd like to start, because as I said, it's always a very valuable opportunity speaking to an author, especially one who's kind of like taken the route that you have. And so I'd like us to maybe roll back to the beginning. So in our previous chat, you sort of mentioned that your professional journey started off in the field of genetics, and now you're in like YA fantasy. So maybe we can start with a little bit of your origin story and like kind of let's see if we can draw the dotted line between genetics and young A fantasy writing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there is a line to be drawn. They are certainly very different. I did start off in science, genetics and biochemistry, but I had always loved reading. So Harry Potter, I was a big fan of that, and a variety of other fiction, but especially fantasy. So like you said, like many other people, I have always had the dream of being published one day. Mm-hmm. But, when you're growing up, or when I was growing up, we would be told, you can't really make a living from being a writer. So it's something you should maybe do in your spare time after you have studied something else and get a real job. So I have always been interested in science as well. So that's how I ended up in that field. But I got to the point where when I started my master's, I got a few months in, and it was just like so soul sucking. I just, repeating the same experiments like day after day and week after week and tweaking some things here and trying again. And I mean, some people thrive on that. My husband managed to make it all the way to doctorate level. But I just, oh no. A few months in, I thought, actually, no, I want to write fantasy books. And if other people can do it, I can do it too. But then I was left with the problem of not having a job and not having written a book yet. So that's how I ended up teaching. So I was a maths teacher for a few years. And I eventually became part-time, which gave me a bit of time to do some writing as well. So I published my first book while I was still teaching. And I taught for about another year after that. And then I went full-time writing and kind of scraped by for another few months. And then things started slowly taking off. So yeah, I've been full-time for a number of years now, 9-ish years, I think. Yeah, I recently passed my 10-year publishing anniversary earlier this year.
Wow.
That's amazing. Congrats.
It has been
such an achievement, especially if you're like reflecting back on your journey, right? And I think Alfie also forgot to mention, we've actually recorded with your husband. So that's how we got exposure to Rachel today, which is great. And it's always interesting when two creatives are coexisting or going through this life in a relationship or not, just moving through life together. And I think it's even more interesting that both of you actually came from a non-creative background and now you are both creatives. But I do want to ask for all the people listening that maybe aren't as familiar with the author world, but are still interested. So we know that you are a self-publishing author. What does self-publishing mean, and what is the opposite of that, normal, traditional publishing? Can you maybe just give us a brief explanation?
Okay, sure. So yeah, the two sides, the two paths you can take are traditional publishing, where you have a publisher, and then the other side is self-publishing, or as we often call it these days, indie publishing, short for independent publishing. So traditionally, an author would submit their manuscripts to an agent or perhaps directly to a publisher if it's a publisher that takes submissions directly. So you're submitting your manuscript, and then there's a gatekeeper, essentially, who's kind of wading through the slush pile and checking to see either what's good enough or what is marketable or what that particular publishing house thinks will do well in the next year or so. It's a lot slower, that route, because you may have to query for years. And then when you do get accepted, it can be another year or two before a book actually makes it onto a shelf and is published, because there's a long process of editing and everything else that comes after that. So independent publishing, as I mentioned last time I chatted to you guys, that there are some people who are writing a book a month. Because when you're doing everything yourself, you can go at your own pace. And I mean, if you have an editor lined up who's ready to read your stuff as soon as it's finished and who goes really quickly, or if you self-edit, or whatever the case is, and there's software that makes it really easy to format. Yeah, because when I don't know how much detail you want to hear, but when you're doing this yourself, you're basically in charge of everything. So like everything that goes into, making the finished product.
Hey, feature.
So me just like waving my latest book over there.
Free advertising.
Then you got to format the ebook. So there's software for that, and format the interior of the paperback and the hardback, and there's the cover design. Obviously, before all of that, there's the editing, the copy editing, the proofreading. And you can outsource all of that. You can pay professionals. There are a lot of freelance professionals in the industry now, or there's things that you can do yourself along the way. And you as the author are basically the project manager, and you have the fun task of putting it all together. And that just depends on how quickly you can do it. And then there's the whole marketing aspect. The other important factor is with traditional publishing, you're getting a very small royalty percentage. So it does obviously vary from publisher to publisher, but it could be as small as, I think, maybe 8-ish% up to maybe around 20. I think 20 is quite high. quite a high
Yo.
percent. It does. Yeah, and it obviously depends. There are going to be different contracts and different publishers. But with self-publishing, in most cases, you can get up to 70% of the royalty, of the selling price.
Massive difference.
So yeah, so when somebody's buying an ebook on Amazon, then Amazon will take their cut, and then I get 70%. Yeah,
Wow.
and it works similarly for the other major platforms, Apple Books and the Google Play Store and all of that. Yeah. So that is kind of an overview of the differences.
And I'm sure we'll kind of get a little bit deeper into some of those things and some of the challenges that you sort of faced along the way. But I think one of the things that I maybe want to talk a little bit about, picking on something that you sort of mentioned earlier, because you sort of said around the time of your master's, you were already starting to think about writing as a possible future, but that wasn't where you went immediately. And can you talk a little bit about that decision and maybe some of the people that you spoke to, either for advice along the way, or some of the things that helped you make that decision? Because especially when you're considering doing something that you're passionate about full time, it's sometimes difficult to think about it logically and actually build that path that can actually lead you to making it a life, like a part of your life. So how did you actually go about, deciding to go teaching first and then and sort of writing in tandem? Like what did that look like?
Well, I think the only people I really spoke to were Kyle. We were dating at the time, but we weren't married yet. And my parents, because I was still studying, so I still had some support from them, or probably all support from them, being a student. I don't think I was earning much for myself. So it was important to get their feedback and to see if they would be supportive of my decision. Because I would have to then move back home. So I understand that not everyone might be in the position to make life changes like that if they don't have a support system. So I was fortunate that my parents understood that, if you hate this and it's kind of crushing your soul and your creativity and you want to go in a different direction, we support you, but you need to now try and get a job. Like you can't just, freeload and live at home. So I kind of looked around, and having a science background, I suppose I didn't have a teaching background though. So I wasn't initially looking at teaching. But we had a family friend who was a principal at a school, and so she'd heard from my mom, oh, Rachel's maybe looking for something. And so there was a position that needed to be filled for just 6 months because someone had left and they didn't have someone new coming in yet. So originally the teaching was supposed to be very short term, but I actually ended up really enjoying it. I did a variety of things in the beginning. I did like arts and culture and IT, which I was not very good at, and maths. And I loved the maths. I enjoyed it at school as well, which is interesting. A lot of people, they often think, I don't know, they comment on how maths and writing, they're so different. But I often think about it with music as well, which is obviously very creative, and music is also so mathematical. So I kind of feel like maths and creativity can often go together. Anyway, that is how I ended up moving into teaching.
Okay. Yeah. And then, so, you sort of mentioned like you kind of figure out that what you're studying is not really a path that you see forward. And so you decide to kind of like make this sort of switch. So, you move back home to have a little bit of stability and support, and then you kind of find a gig that you can kind of do in the meantime. And then I'm assuming you start writing. So like that, let's say the first pieces of work that you did, what did that process look like? Did you first kind of look at traditional publishing? Did you go directly indie? How did you kind of go about that process?
At first, I was hoping to go traditional. So I had the dream of seeing my own books in a bookstore on the shelves. I would go into exclusive books and bargain books and wherever and think, one day my book will be there. That is my dream.
Yeah.
And initially, well, at first I was teaching full time, and I actually did no writing at all for probably those first 6 months that I was teaching, because it was my first time teaching. So I was kind of learning how to teach and doing the teaching and the lesson plans and everything. So I was up till like midnight every night, and then up early in the morning to get to school. So there wasn't any spare time initially. And then, after going part-time or reducing some of my classes, then I managed to get a little bit of time. So I joined the writer blogger community. I can't really remember how I discovered that. I don't know if I was obviously reading, so I probably found my way to some bookish blogs while I was looking for book reviews or something like that. And I saw that lots of authors had blogs. So this being more than 10 years ago, I mean, social media was around, but it wasn't big like it is now. Blogging was kind of like the thing. So I thought, okay, well, I see that other authors have blogs and they write on their blogs, so I should do this too. So I started out kind of just writing about the books that I read. And then as I kind of got more into that blogger community, the community of other aspiring authors, then I discovered like little writing competitions or critique group kind of things, just so, people would exchange writing, or we'd share some of our writing on our blogs. People would comment and give feedback. So that was where I started, while also writing my first book, which will probably never see the light of day, that first book. I think a lot of authors use their first book as just kind of a learning experience.
It's like our first podcast episode. Well, Alfie and I recorded, I think, at least 5 before we actually published one. And if I listen to the first, probably, what are we at 32? If I listen to the first 31, I'm still...
Yeah, but I mean, this is how you learn, right? You just got to get out there and do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think what's worth noting, because I myself actually also didn't know this until very recently, is when you are self-publishing, and you just mentioned it, you actually don't often, or it's not as easy to actually get your book on a shelf in a bookstore. And I was unaware that that's the case. The only way to get your book in exclusive books, or like bargain books, like you said, is to go the traditional route. Is there any way in South Africa, or I know your target audience isn't necessarily in South Africa, but is there still a way for you, if that's a dream, to make it happen, or is it really difficult?
It is possible. As some of my target audience is in South Africa, it's just there's a much larger audience in the US, UK, Canada. So I haven't looked into it in a number of years, but initially I did, because I still thought, it would be cool. Like, my dream changed along the way. Sorry, I think I didn't finish answering your original question, where my dream kind of slowly evolved as the Kindle came out and people were self-publishing, and I really wanted to try that myself. And I kind of let go of that dream of seeing my book in a bookstore. It just became less important to me. And it became more important to like make a living. Like, I really enjoy making a living from my writing.
Don't we all?
So when I looked into it a while back in the beginning, you can get a deal with a distributor. So basically, I think most of the major bookstore chains will only work with a book distributor. So as an independent author, I don't know if things have changed, but when I looked into it, I could, as an independent author, go to a distributor and, do whatever it is that they require you to do, how you package your books and how you warehouse them with the distributor, basically get into their catalog. And then from there, the distributor bookstores can then order from them. But basically, it ended up not being worth it financially, because everyone has to take their cut along the way. So the distributor's got to make money, and the bookstore has to make money. So in the end, it ended up being that my readers had to pay like more than double probably what I would charge, and I would make maybe 10 Rand, if that, on a copy. So I just thought, it would be cool to maybe have my books in a bookstore, but And even then, there'll probably be kind of like a few copies shelved in the back somewhere where most people won't find them unless they're really looking. And like, it's not really worth my time getting this all sorted out just to make such a tiny amount of money at the end of the day. So I have a Shopify store online. So if local readers want to buy directly from me, then they can. And I sign those because they're coming from me. And then for everyone else in the rest of the world, I use print on demand. So I don't know if you've looked into that at all. So on Amazon, and the other company I use is called Ingram Spark. And Ingram Spark is related to Lightning Source, and they produce a lot of the books that go to all the major bookstores around the world. So you're kind of using their same printing facilities, I think. I might be talking rubbish. Anyway, Ingram Spark has their whole printing facilities and warehouses, and you're just uploading your cover file and your interior file, and then it's sitting in the cloud somewhere. So there's no stock that has to be printed and kept somewhere. And someone orders a copy, they print one copy, they ship the copy, and that's it.
Wow.
Sure.
So they do end up more expensive for the customer because it's only one unit. But it means, it's great for me because for the rest of the world, I don't have to worry about shipping to people. So that is really easy. So I'm not, and there is a way that you can get your books into bookstores like Barnes and Noble overseas if you follow all the rules,
the checkboxes
that they look for. They want them to be returnable, and they want to have a retailer discount of like 52% or something. And so you can do it if you really want the possibility of having your books in a store overseas. But again, I was like, it's a bit of a mission, and I would rather earn more money, to be honest. And people can still order my books online. I know you mentioned in our previous call about the struggling artist mindset, and some people do still have that. I don't have that. I am happy I need to make a living, okay? And if I can do that with my art, that's great. So I am not ashamed to say I do need to earn money from this.
Nice. I really love that. I love that you're saying that as well to everyone else listening, especially for the younger creatives listening, because it's such a misconception. But there's quite a few misconceptions I think Alfie and I want to chat about during this episode. But so far, the process you've explained is so fascinating. And I think for so many people who haven't actually delved into this process, it's so valuable to know, because that also means maybe if you do love a specific author and you want to support them, maybe they do also, you can buy from them directly, or if they self-publishing and they're in the bookstore, it kind of helps you make a decision to support the creative rather than this network of money floating around. But I do want to touch on the self-publishing aspect a little bit, and how that helps you as a creative and an author develop yourself. So for a lot of the people listening and the three of us here, if you've read any self-publishing books by self-publishing authors, and then suddenly they go through a publishing house, there are some times where you can actually notice the style changes a bit, the tone of voice of the author changes when they go from self-publishing to traditional publishing. And I find that very interesting, especially because you chose to immediately start self-publishing, which means you haven't actually had the process of traditional publishing. And why I say that is, and you also alluded to it a little bit, where traditional publishing, they kind of look at what's going to be the best sellers or the best themes, topics, stories for the next year. So they're kind of imposing that on you and saying, cool, this is kind of the themes and stuff we want you to focus on and write on, because that will sell. And you as a creative don't have as much freedom to develop and really create your own unique identity or author voice when you are immediately first going that route. Or at least these are the assumptions I'm making. I would love for you to share your opinion on this. If you feel like self-publishing has given you the space to really focus on your readers, focus on what you want to write about and not what would sell best. What is the publishing house trying to look for and sell, stuff like that.
I think it can actually go both ways. So I think kind of what you're saying is what we have come to call right to market, well, in our little indie industry. Mm-hmm. And I think actually being independent gives you the opportunity to write to market a lot faster. Because like I said, you know, if you can write really fast and edit and put it all together really quickly, you see what's selling right now and what is really popular, the trends and all of that. And you write the same thing and then you publish it now or within a few months. Whereas the traditional publishing route is so slow that they're almost having to look into the future and think what is going to sell in 2 years' time, kind of. So there is that. But then there's also like completely on the other end of the spectrum, when you're self-publishing, you can go completely with whatever you want to write. And there is probably a niche for everything out there if you can find the right audience, even if it's something that's really small and not popular at all and doesn't sell well. Like probably pretty much everyone can find a small audience of readers who enjoy the same thing that they write. You just got to find them, which is the biggest challenge. That's the marketing challenge. So I think that is what is so great, that you have the freedom to write whatever you want. Or you look at the market and you make this a commercial thing and you say, okay, that's what's selling. That is exactly what I'm going to write because that's what readers want. Or you kind of try to go in the middle, which is where I mostly try to aim my books with like the intersection of stuff that I enjoy with the tropes and trends that I know readers are looking for. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's kind of like readers become the new gatekeepers because, of course, you know, people will often say about self-publishing that you can just publish crap, and you can, and there is crap out there, but readers are not stupid. So, you know, if somebody picks up a book or downloads a book and they start reading it and it's terrible, well, then they'll put it down and move on to the next thing. So, you know, even if there is rubbish out there, it doesn't mean that people have to read it if they don't like it.
Yeah. No, that's so true. And I think anyone who's spent a bit of time on Goodreads has kind of like seen that with every single book. Doesn't matter how famous, how amazing, there's always that one person who's just like, trash, terrible, why did you even write this?
Goodreads is a dangerous place for an author. I try not to hang out there. Or if I need to go check something, like look for a specific quote, I'm like, okay, right, brace myself. Let's go in there. Wade in through. It's really dangerous.
Yeah, because like, you know, if I think about something like a painter or something like that, people can't leave comments on your paintings. Yes. But like Goodreads is just all sorts of people just telling you what they think about your book, and some of them write whole essays. It's kind of crazy.
Oh yes,
they write a book about your book.
It's kind of like, well, I'm honored that you put so much time into this review. Thank you. Even if you hated the book, thanks.
So I'm almost trying to keep us on this track as we kind of like, and it's okay that we're sort of deviating into different topics of the process, but you know, we kind of went through your early stages, and then you kind of started teaching. And then you sort of mentioned that you started a blog, and that's kind of how you started, you know, building that actual habit of writing. And then the Kindle sort of gets into the picture, and now your dream of what writing looks like starts to evolve, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the first piece that you published and what that looks like? Because, and I'm stepping into the realm of assumptions as well, but I'm imagining it takes you a significant amount of time to actually write this thing. You know, and then the day finally comes where you publish it, and you know, you expect all these bells and whistles and congratulations, and then it's just like every other day. Is that pretty much how it went for you? And can you talk us through a little bit of that the first experience of publishing?
Yeah, it was a little bit anticlimactic like that. So the very first thing I published, I'd still actually, when I began publishing, I was still kind of holding on to this dream a little bit of being traditionally published or having a manuscript to submit to a publisher. But I wanted to experiment. So my thought was, okay, I'm going to have this project. The Creepy Hollow series was my first one. This is my project that I'm going to experiment with self-publishing and see how it goes. And because it was digital publishing, mostly, like most people were starting to read ebooks, the Kindle had been out for maybe 2 or 3 years, I'm not sure. So I thought, well, length doesn't really matter. I kind of envisioned this series of like shorter, they weren't novel length. They were kind of like a third of a novel, maybe like a novella, novelette. There are different definitions. So the first title that I published was the first quarter of this book, The Fairy Guardian.
Nice.
So this was my first whole novel, but what I actually first published was, kind of like that long. It was only about 5 chapters. So yeah, I had, it was a long process that went into writing this tiny, tiny little thing and getting it formatted. Also, this was more than 10 years ago now, and the software that we have today for formatting is makes it so much faster and easier. Back then, I was like coding in inverted commas with HTML, which I know is not like super complicated, but I still felt like I had to figure things out.
Yeah.
So like intense. Kind of coding ebooks.
Wow.
Okay. That's crazy.
Because so now the software available is like you kind of see everything on the what you see is what you get.
Because it's not a PDF, and I think people also forget that. Because if it's an ebook, you can change the font size, the width, so the words need to be dynamically coded in. Yeah, it's not a PDF.
Yeah, it's EPUB, reflowable text. Yeah. So, and back in the day, the big thing for releasing a book was a blog tour, since blogs were popular back then. So I had organized like my little blog tour, which meant that there was, I can't even remember exactly, it was several days, and then each day a few people would post on their blog about the book, a review or just something about it. So I had of that lined up for the launch. But still also now we can do pre-orders, but pre-orders were not a thing back then. So it was literally me like waiting, like choosing a day to click publish and choosing it like 2 days early, just in case the publishing took like a little bit longer. And then like, okay, now it's live. All right. People can buy it now. And I think I sold maybe like 11 copies on the first day. Okay. It really was nothing amazing.
That's successful. I thought when you said 11, I was like, wow.
I think it went down after that.
It's all the 11 family members first.
Yeah, so I certainly wasn't one of the Kindle millionaires in the beginning. It took me a while to build an audience. But I think that's what you asked, kind of how did it all begin? That was my first title. Yeah, and then over the next year, I then published the next few parts. And once I had 4 of these short parts, I thought, actually, I kind of want these to be novels instead. So I want the structure of this whole series to rather be novels. So then I put those 4 parts together, kind of like tweaked a little bit in between so that they fit together more cohesively. And then that became my first novel. And then after that, the rest of the series continued as novels.
Oh,
amazing. Okay, so you've kind of like got now your first release, but you're still teaching because I mean, I don't think 11 purchases is enough to kind of like support a lifestyle.
to move out and yeah.
So I mean, in some ways, this idea of turning writing into a full-time job is at this point still it's still out of reach, but it's it's a goal that's maybe within the realm of possibility. When did it actually happen that you sort of started to feel like, okay, now I'm on the route to leaving like my day-to-day job and actually starting to become in some sense, a professional author. And I don't mean to say you weren't a professional author before that, but maybe rather to identify the fact that your full-time profession was being an author. Like, when did that happen?
That happened definitely before I could actually afford it. So I had been publishing almost a year. And Kyle and I got married at the end of that year. And so he was living in a different town. So I was in Durban and he was in Pietermaritzburg, which was where we met and where I had studied for a while. And then I left studying. And so I moved back to Durban to stay with my parents because I couldn't afford to live on my own. And then after a little bit of teaching, a few years of teaching, and a little bit of publishing, we got married. So I moved to Pietermaritzburg, and my plan was to get another teaching job because, again, I needed to earn a living. And everywhere I looked, there were just no schools needed a math teacher. So at that point, Kyle and I chatted about it, and we're like, okay, well, maybe this is my sign now. Like, I really want to be full-time as a writer. So how about if I give that a go? And I had savings from when I had been teaching, and Kyle was doing his doctorate, so he had funding for that. So he was supported. We were living in a little place that his parents owned, so they weren't charging us a lot to live there. So our living expenses were pretty low. So we were kind of like, well, can we scrape by for our first year? And then if I haven't made it as a professional author by the end of the first year, then I will seriously go back to teaching. And so in that first year of being full-time, but not actually being able to afford to be full-time, I published the second and third book in that first series. And it was about halfway through that year. So after I had the second book out, that I started to earn enough that it was kind of reaching my teacher salary. And then by the time I had the third book, so by the time I got to the end of that trial year, we were thought like, okay, we're safe. I can keep doing this.
Wow.
It's a different landscape now. If I did that now, I'm not sure if it would have gone that way, because the industry has become a lot more established, and there are far, far more authors and a lot more competition. And there's Kindle Unlimited, which is where it's, if you don't know, it's Amazon's kind of like all-you-can-read service. So you pay a monthly subscription, but you have to be exclusive with Amazon. So, and I don't like exclusivity, so I'm not in that. But basically, that provides a whole lot of competition because a lot of authors' books are in that program. So that draws a lot of readers to the Kindle Unlimited books. So basically, it is a lot more difficult now. I don't think I could make a living now with only 3 books. But fortunately, I started early enough that it was possible. Yeah. So there's definitely some luck and circumstances involved in it. Yeah.
Well, you know what they say about preparation and opportunity meeting. That's how luck is created.
Yeah.
I do want to also ask another important part of the process, which is how you went about actually pushing your books into market. Because initially you had 11 people buying your books, the 11 family members. You run out of family members, right? So now you actually need to, especially as a self-publisher, now you actually need to get that niche audience you spoke about. Where do you find them? How did you go about that?
So originally, I knew basically nothing about marketing. I had my little blog tour in the beginning, which probably kind of pushed my books to like a few other writers, because that was kind of a very writer-specific community. And obviously writers do read books as well, but that wasn't like the wider reader audience. So initially, I think the only reason that I sold anything at all for the first year or two is because of Amazon's algorithm, which kind of like it looks at what people read and what they enjoy, and then it pushes those similar things. So it kind of like makes connections between, okay, these readers enjoyed these books that are linked, so they read this one, okay, then we're going to push this one to them. So I think that's because I wasn't driving any traffic to Amazon or pretty much anywhere.
Sure.
I mean, I had social media,
Yeah.
so I would post on my social media, but yeah, I wasn't doing, I think paid advertising was a thing on Facebook at that time, but it was very new if it did exist. And I certainly didn't know how to do it if it was around. Organic reach was a lot better in the beginning on Facebook. So I guess that's how I got followers. So I suppose it was some word of mouth and a few blogs. So I think it was kind of the blogging and the basically Amazon algorithm. And then I discovered that you can there's basically newsletters, so ebook recommendation newsletters or like ebook deal newsletters.
Yeah.
So you as the author or the publisher will pay a fee for the newsletter to highlight your book as a deal for that day and a bunch of other books. So then that's relying on, so readers will sign up as a subscriber for that newsletter. So now, this didn't exist when I began, but now there's a service called BookBub, which is like the holy grail of ebook deal newsletters.
Yeah.
And it is almost impossible as an author to get your book accepted. And when it was still new-ish in its first year or so, and I had only just discovered it, and I was fortunate enough to get a book accepted into this newsletter. And that was probably key in building my audience and kind of like skyrocketing me to, not skyrocketing, still not a Kindle millionaire, but like pushing me to the next level. So because their subscriber base is like millions of subscribers. It's huge. So they're sending out millions of emails every day.
Wow.
And so the way that marketing works is that you'll make book number 1 free, and that's your loss leader, and then you pay the newsletter to tell everybody this book is free. People go and download it. They hopefully read it. They hopefully like it. And then they hopefully buy the next books. So
it's a lot of hopefullys.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of risk as well.
Basically, as you go along the funnel, it gets smaller and smaller. But when you start with a group of 1 million people or whatever it is that they send their emails to, it doesn't matter if the funnel gets smaller along the way. So there were those newsletters, and now these days, and there's also paid advertising with Amazon and Facebook and Instagram, TikTok as well. I don't know if South Africans can advertise. Maybe, I'm not sure. I haven't tried, so I don't know. But yeah, there's all the social media paid advertising, which I'm not very good at. So I haven't done that in a while. I'm kind of mostly relying these days on those newsletter deal sites, and then like social media, like organic social media, word of mouth.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So there's one thing that we haven't touched on yet, and that's more the subject matter of your writing. And I mean, as a person who is very, very deep in the fantasy land, one of the things I'm kind of interested in is how you actually came to choosing your specific genre. And I think, we'll chat a little bit about the genre in question, but then maybe we could also talk a little bit about some of the perceptions or like preconceived notions that people have about it. So can you maybe start by telling us a little bit about how you actually came to choosing what you want to write about and what that development looked like?
Okay, if I can remember. It feels like there's so many factors, I think, that go into coming up with an idea that I can't. Yeah, anyway, okay, so I write fantasy mostly. Under Rachel Morgan, all of my books are fantasy. So it's a genre I've always enjoyed reading. So I've read a lot of it. So by the time I started writing, I had read tons of fantasy. And also, so I discovered young adult as a category of fiction when I was probably like university age. So when I was a teen reading, I mean, there were teen books, but it felt like young adult as a category hadn't really been categorized yet. So I only discovered that a little bit later on, like university kind of. So that's when I then read a lot of young adult fantasy, and I really enjoyed that, writing like teen characters, because everything is so kind of hyper aware of everything. Everything is like a first time, and it's like a big deal. It's like a first love, or it's, it's, and kind of like you have to escape the parents' influence, and like teens saving the world and doing things on their own. So that's how I ended up in writing YA fantasy. And then the characters, and specifically fairies, I can't really remember how I landed on that. I know for the series that I began publishing, Creepy Hollow, it actually started with the two words, Creepy Hollow. I was kind of thinking, because this was like my indie publishing project, my experimental project for me to do. Yeah, brainstorming and trying to think, okay, what kind of fantasy am I going to write? So Creepy Hollow, the name came first. Going back, I think I would actually change that. Like with my marketing hat on, I would probably, because it sounds a little bit too horror, maybe, with Creepy Hollow, which it isn't. It's a lot more like fantasy, adventure, romance, all of that.
What title would you give it now, if someone asked?
Well, that's the problem, because I've thought about it, and I don't know. And my readers who are fans of it, they obviously know that name and they like that name. So when I've suggested, if I could go back, I would change it. They've all been like, "Oh no, we like that name." So it was the name that came first, and then the idea of having these like magical characters who train as warriors to kind of fight evil magic and dangerous magical creatures. And then somehow out of that, I decided that those characters should be fairies, like not tiny fairies with wings, but like yeah. If you read fantasy, then you kind of know what I'm envisioning when I say fae. If you don't read fantasy at all and I say fairies, you're probably thinking Tinkerbell, which is not.
So it's something more like the elves of Lord of the Rings is a little bit closer to what the fae are.
Okay. Yeah. So there's so many things. There's so many influences that come from other books and TV shows and music that it's difficult to kind of pinpoint, other than that name, Creepy Hollow, which I remember coming in the beginning. Other than that, it's difficult to pinpoint the exact inspiration. Yeah.
So Alfie also mentioned, each genre has a few perceptions or stigmas, so to say, around them. And for me particularly, my introduction to fantasy books, if I can remember back, was you got those terrible little romance fantasy series when I was younger. That I always saw in my grandparents' house and in the library. But I would like rather you to share with us, because you're in this world, you've seen what people say and think, and you yourself, right, coming from being a reader to a writer in this space. What do you think have been, and maybe still are, some of the perpetuating stigmas around romance, fantasy genres? And why are they stigmas?
Okay, I will first say I'm not entirely sure what you are referring to when you talk about little fantasy romance. And was that like Mills and Boone type of?
I have no idea. I have this memory of they weren't proper sized books. They were like slightly smaller.
Okay. So I think, especially being in South Africa, and when you go to book festivals, literary festivals, traditionally our literature is very literary. So I kind of felt that being a South African, I was expected almost, if I wrote something, that it should be kind of, more higher grade, if I could put it that way, and literary.
Yeah.
But that was never what I really enjoyed reading. So, and I think some people look down on romance especially, but maybe fantasy as well, as being kind of not as intelligent, or, the people who write it maybe not as intelligent. And some of the romance indie authors who are doing really well are like the most brilliant people you'll ever met. People who used to be like rocket scientists or CEOs of companies who are like, I want to be a romance writer now. And now they're killing it because they know how to run a business as well, and they're really smart.
Yeah.
So, but I think a lot of that stigma is changing. And there is some really great South African fantasy as well. That's kind of like specifically with a South African flavor. Whereas mine is like, I am South African, but my fantasy is kind of more, I suppose, European, if you could call it that, more traditional. So I don't feel the stigma as much, or it might just be the community that I'm in now.
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by people who love genre fiction. So, and I haven't been to a literary festival locally in a number of years. So I can't say actually what they're like now, or what it's, maybe I wouldn't really feel any stigma. Yeah, but initially, and also the being self-published, there was a bit of a stigma around that. But I think that's changing a lot. Yeah, as indie authors produce more and more professional finished products
Yes.
that readers enjoy. Readers can't always tell the difference between what's been traditionally published, what's indie published. It's becoming more accepted. Yeah,
that's amazing, and I think it is good, because I think especially in this social media era, more and more content and different like creative expressions are becoming bite-sized short form type of things. And so I'm actually finding now that I appreciate long form content, whether it's in the form of a podcast or in the form of a book, or the form of an audiobook, which I would like us to get to before the end of this conversation. But there was something else that I kind of wanted to chat a little bit about, and specifically around the romancing, because as you're kind of like speaking, Steph, I sort of thought a little bit about some of the books that I like. So I'm pretty deep into the fantasy space, and the genre that I kind of have fallen into now is lit RPG or literature RPG.
Okay.
It's basically a genre where people like computers have kind of advanced pretty far, and you get full body immersion virtual reality. And something that I like when I think about romance, because I think I'm one of the people who struggles with romance a little bit, but it's not necessarily even that I look down on it. I sort of feel like, for lack of a better word, it's a bit too mushy for me. Like I feel like uncomfortable at specific parts.
But you are mushy.
and the thing is, I also at the same time appreciate the fact that that's what a lot of people like about it. And I think that's the sort of the strange thing I think about writing is you kind of have this niche who absolutely love what you're doing and maybe even follow it more than the author themselves. And then you've got this whole other demographic that you almost don't even exist to. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about what that's been like, kind of having this community that's almost following your thoughts and your work so closely? Because I think there are not very many other sort of creative disciplines. When I think about painters, or I think about even musicians, because with musicians, I might listen to music a lot, but it almost stops at the music. But I find when it comes to books, like people will go and like look up the author, read every single blog post that you've put out, and like they kind of like get really into you. So can you tell us a little bit what that's been like?
Yeah, I mean, some of the fandoms out there are like not mine necessarily. I mean, I'm still very small, but some of the major fandoms, like with all the character art, they're just people will. Oh, I'm just thinking about some of the TikTok accounts and some of the Instagram accounts. Like people will base their entire catalog of content like around one book series that they're so invested in and so obsessed with, that, performing skits and posting quotes and the fan art. And the fandom can be like next level for some people. And I'm sure there are many readers who know books better than the author themselves. I'm pretty sure I have readers who have read my books more than I have, and I'm the one who wrote them. Yeah. And who definitely know more, like the book that I wrote, 8 to 10 years ago, I don't remember. Sometimes I have to go, I look back to look for something. So every now and then there's a reason I need to go back into a book to look for something. And I'll be scanning through stuff and I'm like, wow, I do not remember this at all. Did I write that? Yeah. Sometimes
That's
it's good. I'm like,
amazing.
oh, that's not too bad. Other times I'm like, oh, I would have written that differently now. But the whole fandom thing and I'm just thinking like how you compare it to other art and music with words. It's almost like you're in somebody else's head when you're reading the book.
Yeah.
And so depending on how much of themselves an author has put into the book, it can be a very personal experience. Maybe that's why the romance stuff makes you uncomfortable or part of it. It's like you just don't want to know that, or you don't want to know that somebody else was thinking that and then put it into words. Depending on the level of how graphic it is. Yeah. So it's that's also what makes it difficult in the beginning when you're starting out, because it's like you're putting yourself out onto the page and then putting it out in the world for people to judge, like people on Goodreads who are ruthless.
Yeah.
But as time passes and you you get used to it, and you also probably, well, for me at least, I think you put less of yourself, or maybe just little bits here and there, or it's easier as time passes to separate yourself from your work. So it's, I don't know how the readers feel, but then for me, it feels less personal if I've put less of myself into the book. Although I do become very invested in my characters and I'm in their heads, and then, then the readers are in their heads. So I guess the community is cool because then you're connecting over the same characters. Same stories, and readers get very invested as well, and they're like, oh, how did you let that thing happen to that person? Can't wait to see what happens next, and all of that.
So
there's one more thing that I'm super interested in. So a little bit of backstory, and I think our audience has maybe heard me talk about this a number of times, but firstly, I'm dyslexic, and especially when I was younger, I wasn't really into books. I loved stories because when we were little, my dad would put us all in bed and then he'd kind of like read a story for us. And I loved that. But anytime it was me who actually had to open a book, it was like pulling teeth. And then one day, a friend of mine in high school introduced me to the Harry Potter audiobook. And like my life was changed because it was like, now I can actually read a book without needing to read it.
Who was that? Was it narrated by, is it Stephen Fry? Do you know who did that one?
So I listened to, I've listened to both. But the first one that I listened to was Stephen Fry or Stephen Fry.
Oh, he's really good.
He's amazing.
Brilliant.
So it was a while before I delved into other spaces in audiobooks. For a long time, it was just the Harry Potter audiobooks, because I also didn't know that other books had audiobooks. I thought this was like a once-off thing that I found, and I treasured it, and I've listened to those audiobooks so many times. Yeah. And then, eventually moving on, I got my Audible account, and I probably spend more on Audible than I should each month.
Okay, then I must tell you what app you should use instead of Audible then, but continue.
Cool.
Or can I tell you now?
Definitely. But then we will definitely get to that, because I do need that. But so as kind of like time moved on, I kind of like left written content behind completely. And one of the tragedies of that is there are a lot of authors who either don't have the time or aren't really looking to sort of enter the audiobook space. But one thing I was quite surprised about, and I found that I've especially struggled with that with independent authors, because it is all up to them. And it's a whole different experience to writing a book, even after you have the whole thing written. Can you maybe talk a little bit through the process of actually starting to do audiobooks? Because I was quite surprised when I kind of went through your website that quite a number of your series actually do have audiobooks. How did you first get into it, and what does that process actually look like?
So the reason that you'll see, especially in the indie space, there's not as many audiobooks is because it's very expensive to produce. So, I mean, like with ebooks, especially like if you're just publishing an ebook and you kind of like trading services, like, you know, cover design or editing or whatever, you can publish. I mean, you can publish for free, basically. Like if you do your own cover design and you get other things done for free. I mean, that's maybe not suggested, but it's possible if you can't afford anything at all. Whereas for an audiobook, you have to pay a narrator, or you narrate it yourself, which is probably for many authors is not in their part of their skill set. Certainly for me, it isn't. So you're either doing like a royalty share option where you're then sharing royalties as you go forward with a narrator, or you're paying upfront and they charge per finished hour, and it can be very expensive.
Yeah,
so
per hour.
The narrator that I've used a number of times, her rate is $350 per finished hour of audio. So that's
intense.
I mean, if I'm doing the longest book that she did for me was about 16 hours. So it's it becomes very expensive.
I definitely don't want to pirate audiobooks anymore. I feel so guilty.
Yeah, don't do that. It costs somebody a lot of money.
That's crazy.
I mean, obviously the rates vary hugely. Some narrators who are less experienced will charge less, and then somebody who's really well known and very popular could charge a lot more than that. And so if you have a traditional publisher, they are the ones who are paying for that. So then that's why in the traditional space there's a lot more options. Yeah.
Okay.
So my first series, I hadn't listened to audiobooks after a few years of writing, so I wasn't really in that space like you have been. So it wasn't really on my horizon at all. And also Amazon's their program is called ACX, their audiobook creation exchange, whatever it is, was not available, still not available, I don't think, for South Africans. So it wasn't actually an option for me, even if I had wanted to do audiobooks. So I was approached by a publisher who had seen my books and had obviously thought they're doing well enough, there's an audience. And so they offered me a contract to do the audio. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do this myself. So, okay, cool, you guys can do that. So my first series, which is 9 books, a publisher did those. So I didn't have to pay for that production. But it does mean that they have the distribution rights. So just like with a traditional publisher, I can't do anything with that audio because I get royalties from them and they choose where they want to publish it. But then going forward, as the audio space started to just explode, and I don't know if you know, being an audio listener, maybe you're aware of the fact that it's just the growth in the audio market has been phenomenal. Yeah. So as an author, like I'm like, okay, well, obviously I want to cash in on that. Like there are a lot of listeners out there. Some of my readers don't read at all, and they only want to consume in audio. So they will wait until an audiobook is available. So now these days, there are more options available for a self-published author to create audiobooks. So the other major service is called Findaway Voices, if any of your listeners are interested in looking it up. So that is the service I've used, and you can either use them to find a narrator, or if you've connected with someone privately, then you kind of get it produced privately, and then you use Findaway Voices to distribute to Amazon and Apple and Google and everywhere else.
Okay.
And then just like with self-publishing anything else, all the royalties then come back to me. So the problem is then like the upfront cost is huge because I obviously have to pay my narrator upfront many thousands of dollars to produce that. And then I'm waiting month after month after month to recoup my costs from sales. Which if when I just had like one book in a series done, I obviously didn't do very well, but with the growth in the market and then having like complete series done, then the audio starts to do better and better. Yeah.
And then you mentioned there is an alternative app to Audible that we should be looking at.
The app that I use is, I don't know if you say Scribd or Scribed. I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
Yes, I've seen it. Yes.
Scribd. And you pay your monthly fee like you do with Audible, but you get unlimited ebooks and audiobooks. Well, I say unlimited. I think that the system does start to limit you if you listen or read too much. But kind of like they call it like unlimited with an asterisk. But basically, if you're not listening and reading like all the time, then I don't think you ever really reach the level where you've consumed too much. So then compare that to Audible, where you're only getting 1 credit a month.
Yes.
And like you should not be, I don't know if you are returning, like some people have done, they use their credit and then they return the audiobook and then they get another credit, which you should not be doing because the author loses out. The author doesn't get paid.
Of course.
When I first started listening to like audiobooks during my student days, I did that because I didn't have enough to kind of get through it. But like I probably get through like 6 credits a month now. Just because I get through too many books, and because I basically listen to audiobooks all the time. Like I barely listen to music anymore. I don't really watch TV. Like movies are not really my thing. I'm just like in audiobooks all the time.
Audiobooks and podcasts I'm consuming a lot of these days. So like you probably won't be able to find everything that you're looking for because there is some stuff that is Audible exclusive. Like Amazon likes to make their exclusive content to suck you in.
Of course.
But there is a lot of other stuff from major publishers on Scribd, so you should check it out.
100%.
Nice.
I feel like I should be an affiliate at this point. The number of times that I've recommended this app to people.
All right. Well, I think we almost at the closing parts of the conversation. But we do have one last question for you. And this is a question from a previous guest. And that is just to share, if you can remember, what is the worst advice you've ever received?
Oh.
You don't have to tell us who told you.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I feel like in the writing kind of world, like there's that advice where people will say write what you know, which is bad because like how would you ever write any fantasy, where you make things up?
Fair enough.
I'm sorry. I'm sure there must be something.
No, I like what you said because that's kind of applicable to anything. It's like practice what you know, do what you know, which is then we never grow and discover new things.
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry, I'm not thinking of anything else right now.
No, I think it's a really good short snippet of not listening to that advice. For any of the listeners that want to find your books or want to read more about you as an author or get in touch or see some of your writing resources, can you maybe throw us all the social and website links for them to go follow, subscribe, find?
Okay, sure. My main website is rachel-morgan.com. So rachel-morgan.com. And on all social media, I think pretty much all social media, I'm author Rachel Morgan. So
nice.
Instagram, TikTok, Facebook,
Well, there you guys have it. We'll also post all the links for you in the announcement post to go find it directly. But Rachel, thanks so much for your time. It's been really nice talking to you. I've learned so much in this hour.
Same.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
We'll see you next week, guys. Have a good one.